G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Making a mad scientist movie. Mad scientist movie that's going to be remedial therapy in SunFoil theory and practice. Making this one for a bloke called PJD 412 who left a comment on a movie of mine called SunFoil Self-Starter ... Yay team. There you go. That's what the movie looks like, SunFoil Self-Starter, Yay team. And down here, PJD 412 said, the energy contribution of that little panel is minuscule. Better to move to the city, get rid of the car altogether and use public transportation. That might be your way of looking at it, mate. But before you make such a wild statement, you really should crunch the numbers on it. I live in Australia. The average Australian emits 30 tonnes of atmospheric carbon per year. It's a bit sad, but it's true. I live on an endangered species sanctuary, 100 acres of regrowth forest, and it sequesters 100 tonnes a year. I've weighed my firewood. I know how much LP gas I use in the kitchen stove. I write down my fuel use for chainsaw, whippersnipper, vacuum sucker, backup generator and car, and a litre of petrol emits 2.5 kilograms. So I used to emit 9.7 tonnes of atmospheric carbon a year. Since I put the 30 watt panel on the roof of my car, I'm saving 5.33 litres a week driving the same distance at the same speed. That's 266 litres a year, which is about 690 kilograms, nearly 3/4 of a tonne. So I'm now emitting 9 tonnes instead of 9.7, so I've shaved about 8% off my personal carbon emissions just by putting that solar panel on my car. Haven't changed anything else, just put a panel on the car. So it's not valid to compare the output of the solar panel with the full throttle output of the engine. You have to look at how much power the engine is actually developing in regular daily use and what that power is being used to do. Now let's just say that the car's equipped with a 60 horsepower engine. Actually a 120 horsepower aircraft engine that's been derated on the throttle because it was developed by the Japanese for powering target drones for the military. That's the story of the Subaru engine. 60 horsepower engine in the car, and the car weighs probably 3/4 of a tonne or something like that, maybe a tonne. If you pump the tyres up to their recommended maximum pressures of 44 pounds per square inch, so the wheels are actually round, and then if you get your round wheels on flat, smooth concrete, you will find that a pair of human legs can push the car forward at walking pace, which we're going to call 5 kilometres an hour, and we'll say that there is practically effectively zero aerodynamic effect. Because we're going on a flat, smooth road, we can ignore any up and down factors. And let's face it, if you start from a fixed base of operations and you drive away in the morning and you come home in the night, you have climbed as many hills as you have descended. Otherwise you wouldn't be back at your starting elevation. So everybody theoretically drives an effectively flat course. They go up, they go down. So, a pair of human legs can push the car at walking pace. That's your rolling resistance for all 4 wheels and every bearing in the powertrain from the road all the way up to the clutch plate. 1/3 of a horsepower. I think the bloke who pedalled the Gossamer Albatross across the English Channel maintained 0.36 of a horsepower to maintain altitude, took him 0.7 of a horsepower to take off, and it was taking him 0.5 of a horsepower to climb, and he got across the English Channel on it. So it's a reasonably good ballpark figure. 1/3 of a horsepower to push your car with no aerodynamic drag. Ramp the speed up to 50 kilometres an hour and you're driving around the town legally. 5 horsepower for aerodynamic drag at 30 miles an hour for something which an aerodynamicist would say has been built backwards with a sharp front and a blunt tail. And because I am a low-speed aerodynamics consultant specialising in the weight shift 3-axis interface, I can tell you that as speed doubles, airspeed, then aerodynamic drag squares. So your 5 horsepower at 50 kilometres an hour driving around the town, on the highway at 100 kilometres an hour, that becomes 25 horsepower. And you've still got your third of a horsepower worth of rolling resistance. Which means that you can forget about your 60 horsepower or 50 kilowatts. We're talking about between 5 and 25 horsepower. That's to drive the gearbox which drives the wheels and makes the thing move. And that's what cars are primarily intended to do. They're intended to move. Right, so that's covered briefly the power mechanics and the aerodynamics. Now let's look at the drivetrain engineering and the electromechanical side of it and the electrochemical side of it, right? To start the engine, there's an electric starter motor which draws current from a lead-acid battery. The battery expects to be refilled by an alternator, and the alternator is belt-driven from the crankshaft of the engine. Yeah, well, that seems reasonable enough, doesn't it? Now, the engine is an overhead valve, horizontally opposed, water-cooled pushrod engine. So it's about 25% efficient at turning petrol into torque or twistiness. The alternator reaches a peak efficiency of 50% efficient at turning twistiness into electricity, reaches that between 3,000 and 4,000 revs per minute. But the motor car might be sitting at the traffic lights and it might be night time and the headlights might be on and the brake lights might be on and the stereo might be on and the hooter fan might be on. So the alternator needs to be able to make some electricity when the engine is idling at 1,000 revs a minute. But the alternator needs 1,300 revs a minute in order to run its own exciter circuit. Therefore, it's operating at a 2-to-1 step-up belt drive. It goes twice as fast as the engine. When the engine's idling at 1,000 revs, the alternator's doing 2,000 revs. And therefore it's about 10% efficient and it can put out about 25% of its rated output, which is just barely enough to run the spark plugs without flattening the battery while you wait for the traffic lights to change. But it means that when you're humming along the highway at 100 kilometres an hour, when the engine is doing 3,000 revs per minute, the alternator is going to be doing 6,000 revs per minute, and it's only going to be about 30% efficient because it's going too fast for pure efficiency. So the alternator has a practical efficiency, an operating efficiency of 25%. This means to get 50 amps of 12 volt current, or roughly 1 horsepower of electricity out of this thing, you have to put, on average, 4 horsepower of twistiness or torque into the pulley at the front of it, and it's a 2-to-1 step-up drive belt. So you need to put 8 horsepower into the belt to get 1 horsepower of electricity out of the alternator. Now, PJD 412, compare that to what happens in a purpose-designed petrol electric generating set. Here we have a 25% efficient overhead valve pushrod engine. Right? Same efficiency as the car. It's a 5 horsepower engine. Here we have an alternator that's designed to be 50% efficient at 3,000 RPM, and it's running at exactly crankshaft speed. There is no step-up drive belt, there is no torque multiplier. So 50% of the engine's torque turns into electricity and the engine's 25% efficient, so the generating set is 12.5%. versus a 3% efficient electric generator. Now that means that any amount of solar electricity fed to the battery is going to be subject to a multiplier effect in terms of how much fuel the solar electricity will save you having to burn. And on that question, how much fuel is it going to save? Well, the way I see it, a lead acid battery loses 1% of its stored charge every day that it sits there connected to nothing. That's a 95 amp hour lead acid battery, so it's going to lose 0.95 of an amp hour every day if I just had the battery start off with it fully charged and just sit it down on the ground under a tree. It'll lose 0.95 of an amp hour in the first 24 hours. That happens due to a phenomenon called sulfation, and during sulfation, lead sulfide paste, which is electrically conductive and it is soluble, which is formed on the lead plates of the battery, that crystallises into lead sulfate, which is insulating, so it blocks that bit of the plate, and it's not soluble, so it never comes off unless you thermally shock it and make it fall off. So every 24 hours you have to recharge the battery, and you've got to give a battery 1.1 times whatever current it lost to recharge it. So every day the battery requires 1.1% of its stored charge, otherwise it gets flat and it gets wrecked. But the car battery is not doing nothing. When it's sitting over there in the parked, it's running the dashboard clock and it's feeding the stereo's memory chip, and they between them suck 0.1 of an amp. 0.1 of an amp times 24 hours is 2.4 amp hours, plus the 0.95 of an amp hour for the sulfation. So you're looking at 3.35 amp hours for 24 hours sitting in the car park, and you've got to give it 1.1 times 3.35, so that's 3.68. 3.68 amp hours, and that car over there burns about 200 to 220 mils of petrol per amp hour because it's only a 3% efficient generator. So we're looking at 660 mils per day, or 5.3 litres per week. Yep, and if you let the car sit there for 3 or 4 days, trying to save fuel by saving up all your shopping trips, and you let the battery get 12 amp hours down, and you've only got a 15-minute trip to town, it means the alternator is going to try and hit it with 40 or 50 amps for the first 5 minutes, and then as the battery voltage comes up, the alternator will back off and back off and back off, and it actually takes 45 minutes to finish recharging a battery using a car alternator because of the voltage dominant regulator. And of course, I live 15 minutes out of town. My average engine run time is 6 minutes, and that's only enough to put 70% of a charge into a battery. And behold, having put a solar panel on the roof of my car, I'm saving 33.25% of my pre-modification fuel burn. My battery used to be about 30% flat, and the aerodynamics of the boundary layer controlled faceted aerofoil that I've turned the solar panel into actually improved the car's fuel burn by about 3% even in the moonlight. It's better than that on a sunny day because I've set the thing up as a waste heat driven thermosiphon powered cooling fan, which blows cold air on the bottom of the solar panel and vents the hot air out the trailing edge when it's sitting stationary. And when you're going up the road, you've got 13.68 litres a second going into the 16 air inlets, and you've only got room for 8 litres a second to come out the outlet blast tubes. So the air inside the box gets pressurised 40%. The air that comes out the blast tubes is 1.2 times surrounding barometric pressure, and it's 1.2 times the slipstream speed. So the high-speed compressed air blowing on the underside of the trailing edge through the vents uses Coanda effect to pull the airflow over the 45-degree top rear trailing edge, and it uninstalls the aerofoil. And the aerofoil then blows its downwash onto the trailing glass window, and yeah, I've succeeded in making an electric solar thermal ramjet that's measurably functional. There's a couple of them in captivity. I made one from the son's car and then he sold the car. So, PJD 412, You need to go and look at a movie called SunFoil Science. It's got all the raw data and the analysis of it. You'll have a look at the logbook on which I wrote down every engine stop and start time for a year, and used to get up half an hour before first light so that I could measure the battery voltage and the solar panel output, so I could see how much it took to trip the regulator in the mornings. Those observations were sensitive enough that I managed to detect incoming coronal mass ejections and solar flares by their effect on the Earth's magnetic field, which has a variable effect on a battery depending on the battery plate's orientation within the magnetic field. You want your car battery to work best, park it with its plates lined up magnetic north-south. It reduces losses to sulfation. It makes the battery storage efficiency better. So yeah, I've looked at it backwards, forwards and sideways. I'm not having myself on. I'm getting 10.66 kilometres to the litre monthly, whereas I used to get 8 kilometres to the litre monthly, driving at the same speed, doing the same distance, with the same vehicle on the same terrain. My son had a Subaru Brumby, which is the same engine, gearbox, wheel size, slightly different weight. He had a different driving regime. Took us best part of a year to tease out that he was saving 4.2 litres a week. And when I originally started this, with 5 1-watt panels, 3 of them pointing in different directions and 2 pointing straight up in an omnidirectional, low drag, faceted aerofoil, this thing saved 1.5 litres a week. Used to scare the shit out of people who were driving towards me on the road because they'd see it, and due to the air gap, they'd see that thing sitting above my car, and it looked like it was about a 30-foot diameter UFO with Darth Vader sitting above and behind my car, getting ready to zap them with the wingtip lasers. So it's been honourably retired. The Mark III's not nearly as scary. Most of them don't see it. It's like there's an SEP field around it, it's somebody else's problem field. People look through it or around it. They don't notice it. But anyway, it's a long time since I crunched the numbers. I got 217,000 movie views, and about 20% of my movie views are on movies which are to do with sunfoils. And I figure if there's 40,000 sunfoil movie views, there's probably about 400 sunfoils getting around the planet. People have watched my movies and turned it over in their mind and couldn't find any reason not to do it, so they've gone ahead and done it. There are 6 in my postcode, counting mine and the son's. Mate of mine who, I sort of supervised his, 2 others that, I supervised, and then there's 1 actual genuine self-starter. And I figure that if a 30-watt panel on a 1.8 litre petrol engine 4-wheel drive can save 3/4 of a tonne of carbon emissions per year, while giving the car about a 12% higher top speed and at least 12% more torque on the highway, and from idle, if you compare starting off with a full battery to starting off with a flat battery to drive off at the traffic lights, you've got about 300% more starting torque. It's a no-brainer. It's the biggest, lowest hanging fruit on the entire alternative energy tree, and I think that the average car is probably going to save about 1 tonne of emissions per year, because most cars have bigger engines than this. Most cars have bigger electrical systems. So if I've saved 100 tonnes a year of carbon by sequestering it on the endangered species sanctuary, and another 400 tonnes a year by telling people to put solar panels on their car, and yeah, best thing I can do is stay out here in the forest and figure out ways that work. And PJD 412, if you want to kid yourself that public transport, electric trains run by coal-fired power stations to shift you around the city, if you think that's good for you, The 18, you have fun with it, but it ain't for me. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Fit a SunFoil, please. Ciao.